Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Dett's Xenotypes, Stoneborn. For starters, you'll need to own the Biotech DLC. I'll also be covering the Stoneborn Style Pack, which requires Ideology, and the Stoneborn Delight too, which needs Vanilla Expanded Framework, Processor Framework, and Harmony. Quite a few dependencies for this rundown, still totally worth it though, because today we're going to rock and stone, brothers. If the dirt moles weren't really what you wanted out of a mountain dwelling race, the Stoneborn has your back. So let's do the most obvious thing and jump into what exactly the base mod is packing. Firstly, outside of the Xenotype itself, you'll be getting the Stoneborn clan faction, that's equal to a civil Outlander union in tech and attitude, whilst being comprised entirely of Stoneborn. This means, in most cases anyway, it's going to be unlikely that you're raided by the Stoneborn in many scenarios. So if you're wanting to run a Stoneborn only colony and you need prisoners to convert over to your faction, consider angering these guys so that they might potentially send some recruits your way. Even better if you can steal a couple of their colonists in the process of angering them, by downing members from one of their trade caravans. The Stoneborn come in with a pretty chunky germline list of genes, with surprisingly few being cosmetic only. Skill wise, you're looking at some strong construction and mining, with great crafting. So you're incentivized to live in mountainous areas, digging vast underground bases that everyone will be able to contribute into the excavation and fortification of, before swapping over to an artisan lifestyle that allows you to basically produce staggeringly beautiful items as standard. You'll never be hurting for high quality gear with Stoneborn. To offset this, they're pretty poor with animals and absolutely awful at social, so prisoners are going to take considerable time to convert and recruit. If you see people with traits that reduce their global loss certainty, you'll pretty much be fighting a losing battle in most cases, as their certainty will usually rise faster than you can lower it with simple interactions. So you're going to be relying on masterful conversion rituals, which I've heard in the Dwarven culture go pretty hard.
Put your fucking hands up!
To go with these skill affinities, Stoneborn also have Stone Call, an active ability with a 12-hour duration and a 6-day cooldown. This will get you 30% additional construction and mining speed, absolutely ideal for those times when you need to get a new living quarters up and running in a single day. Then we get the genes that lean into their stunty nature. Stoneborn have slightly slower move speed than normal, a tolerance for the cold, dark places of the earth, while suffering a weakness to bright, scorching temperatures. They're further incentivized to live in the mountains thanks to the underground gene, which forces the trait of the same name. So if you're landing in an open field with these guys, you're doing it wrong. This also plays into them being better at fighting in tight corridors because of their near-sighted nature, as their accuracy is going to greatly diminish over a medium or long distance. They're also more likely to settle verbal disagreements with a fist fight than other Xenotypes, which isn't as much of an issue thanks to their robust bodies that can take a beating, so they're less likely to break fingers, toes, or noses in these scuffles. Their hardiness is also visualised with the dwarfism gene, that lowers their mass, meat, leather, and cosmetic size for all Stoneborn, making them short and stout, like a teapot.
Every wrong is recorded. Every slight against us.
Stoneborn have a longer lifespan than standard Xenotypes, so they won't be impacted with age afflictions as early as others. So whilst you still might not want to pick starting colonists that are 80 or 90 years old, you're in a safer place to grab those that are in their 50s. Not only are Stoneborn more resilient to the effects of time, they're completely immune to cirrhosis, allowing them to drink their entire lives without complication. Outside of the potential addictions, crippling hangovers, effect on their work and social life, alienation from new and old friends alike, loss of motivation, drive, and purpose in life. Oh, and crippling depression. So yeah, alcohol for breakfast. Awesome. Despite killing brain cells with all of that alcohol, Stoneborn also have exceptional memories, which lowers the rate that they lose skills and increases the duration of any moodlets, both positive and negative. Great for bonuses from weddings, parties, or good rituals. Awful for any losses that the colony experiences. Make sure you're getting good use out of your Moral Guide's counsel ability. Finally, Stoneborn are immune to psychic phenomena, so they're never going to make good psychcasters, but equally they are completely safe from psychic drones in their mountain home. They also suffer with a low libido, so if you want Stoneborn kids, pebbles I guess, you're going to want to make sure the box is ticked for Try For Baby, as every opportunity is going to need to count. For cosmetics, they have Fat, Hulk or Standard bodies, with both men and women also having big bushy eyebrows and
A great big bushy beard.
it's like Playboy in the 80s. No wonder they've got a low libido. So that is the race itself, but obviously we want the accompanying material too. Let's look at the Dwarven style pack then. If you're using Ideology, you'll be getting replacement textures for the Longsword, Knife, Spear, Gladius, Breach Axe, Equark, Club, Mace, Warhammer, Axe, LMG, Revolver, Minigun, Heavy SMG, Assault Rifle, Charge Rifle, Chain Shotgun, Baby Decorations, Small, Large and Grand Sculptures, Stools, Dining Chairs, Tables of all sizes, Standing and Torch Lamps and the Recon and Marine Helmets. So basically anything that could be replaced in vanilla is replaced. Not only that, you'll be getting a new funky ritual sound, a new buildable dwarven tile that functions the same as a fine stone tile. You get 2 new options for your ideogram, or if you'd rather, 3 new altars. Not only that, if you're using vanilla furniture expanded, you even get a fancy new dartboard with a more fitting target. The style is obviously easy to cover. It's extremely well done and fits perfectly alongside the vanilla design aesthetic. If you're running Ideology, you'll already know that this Xenotype goes perfectly with memes like Tunneler and Human Primacy for the production specialist role, so it's nice and easy to build an Ideology around the single Xenotype and try and run yourself an exclusive colony. You'll just need to soldier on with the poor social for a while. But that isn't all. Then we've got Stoneborn Delights. This introduces 1 new cask, 3 new plants, 1 new creature, and 1 new mineral, which in turn gives you access to 5 new raw ingredients to work with that could become 2 different types of mush, or potentially 1 of 13 new drugs. That is a fair old whack of new things to play with, all of which are spread out over 3 new research projects, with one of them sneaking its way into Psychite refining. So let's break this down into something more manageable, shall we? Starting off with the 3 new plants. You've got Blade Root, Bull's Horn and Stoutcap. All of these are underground species, requiring total darkness to grow, so you're going to want to make sure you've got access to fungal gravel, ideally if you want to grow these safely inside your mountain home, otherwise you're going to need a big old box over some soil outside to keep it in a nice dark environment. All of these plants have the same fertility requirement of just 30% with a 15% sensitivity, so planting them in rich soil is going to make very little difference. Stoutcap is the easiest of the 3 to plant, requiring only 4 skill, taking around 16 days to mature with a standard yield of 11. The Blade Root is next at 5 skill, taking 21 days to mature and yielding only 9. The hardest is Bull's Horn, needing 7 skill to sow, taking 28 days to fully grow and yielding again only 9. So these are your plants, which will get you raw plant material of the same name, and whilst these do have a nutritional value tied to them, they're not an ingredient for food, so ideally you want to keep them somewhere cold and disallowed from your colonist diet, similar to what you do with psychoid leaves, hops or smoke leaf. The new mineral is Glimmer Quartz, a bright pink crystal that is easily shattered, potentially yielding a Glimmer Quartz chunk, something you'll be able to further refine in a couple of ways. But for now, just remember you don't always get a guaranteed drop from every tile of quartz, so it's best to make sure that a highly skilled miner with the best possible yield chance is doing the work on these veins. The new creature is a Fae, a tiny, extremely fragile insect that typically appears when you start making use of dwarven casks, as it's attracted to the fermentation procedure, and will attempt to drink the products. When they're butchered, they give you insect meat and Fae wings. These wings are a fairly expensive item, but can be used to make some pretty nice drugs for your colony. So that's the first step, as it were, your base ingredients. From here we can further refine them and bring in additional ingredients to make even more fun things. Let's start with what you'll automatically have access to, regardless of if you've completed any other research. So while some of these do require a specific workbench, they aren't unlocked with the research that gives you the bench, if that makes sense. At the crafting spot or the drug lab, you can make Fae wing joints. Each of these will take 2 wings to make and dramatically drops the wealth of the ingredients that are used, with each joint costing just 16 silver compared to the massive 200 on each wing. So if trade goods are what you want, stick to selling wings. Fae wing itself has a safe dose interval of around 4 days with no random overdose chance, so it's a pretty dangerous drug to use frequently, but it's entirely safe on the odd occasion, with its minimum tolerance for addiction being 20%. Meaning you'd need to use 5 of these in succession to push you into a danger zone. The buff from this drug is 50% extra consciousness, with a 40% penalty to move speed, and depending how you look at it, either a 40% debuff to psychic sensitivity or a 40% resistance to psychic effects. So whilst this will make a colonist sluggish, the bonus to manipulation and conversation is insanely worthwhile. Consider using these before trading or conducting rituals, especially with the socially stunted Stoneborn, as it provides a massive bonus to all of their stats. At the Stonecutters table, you can turn Glimmer Quartz chunks into plain old Glimmer Quartz, with each chunk making 20 doses. Glimmer is a hard drug, with an extremely small overdose chance of just 0.2%, and the constant threat of addiction at 2.5% for every hit taken. Glimmer Quartz is essentially sugar, providing 20% to the hunger bar, lowering the sleep fall rate, increasing consciousness by 10% and movement by 25%, at the cost of making the colonist a little hyper, so they struggle to focus on the task at hand, lowering their global work speed to 80%. Whilst this isn't an expensive addiction to feed, it might become difficult as time goes on due to the somewhat scarce nature of Glimmer Quartz chunks. If you can't get your hands on more pink rock, your colony might get a little angry about it.
Tight, yeah! Blue, yellow, pink! Whatever, man, just keep bringing me that.
At the brewery, you have two options. You can make raw shatter brew and elixir mush. The mush is the quickest one to cover, needing 20 bull's horn and 10 blade root. This mush will need to be kept in a freezer to ensure that it stays fresh, and you won't be able to add it to a standard wooden fermenting barrel. This needs a dwarven cask, which is unlocked later, so don't rush to make a bunch of these until you've got the research to go with it. Whilst this recipe does say you need complex concoctions to unlock it, that's actually a more efficient recipe. So if you want to hold out until you've unlocked that later tech, you can save yourself a few bull's horn. The raw shatter brew is another beast entirely. It takes 10 meat, 10 veggies, 10 stout cap and 5 stone blocks. This will then take a further 18 days in ideal conditions to ferment inside its own vessel. You want these somewhere warm, on a standard shelf in the dining room ideally. When the shatter brew is ready, it can be consumed to completely fill a colonist's hunger bar, as well as granting a +8 moodlet whilst the shatter brew buff is on them too. The buff lasts for around 21 hours, starting at gorged, increasing consciousness by 15% and boosting melee damage up to 120%. It also makes it less likely that they're going to need another meal anytime soon, as it reduces hunger rate offset by 40%. Unfortunately, this comes with a pounding hangover, which is going to basically nullify that consciousness buff, and a movement speed penalty of 30% due to how bloated they feel. When this eventually drops down to just full after around 9 hours, the hangover is able to clear and the buffs drop a little bit in potency. Consciousness to 10%, melee damage to 110%, hunger rate offset to 20%, and the movement debuff to just 20% now. Finally, after another 6 hours or so, this drops to just fed. This sees consciousness surge to a massive 50% buff. The alcohol and food coma have passed, and now they're ready to face the world. The other offsets all drop again slightly, with a 10% movement debuff, 10% hunger rate offset, and 105% melee damage. So whilst you likely don't want people consuming Shatterbrew for every single meal, they're fantastic when timed correctly, letting you hopefully sleep through the hangover and wake up with that consciousness buff slowly headed your way. Hopefully, anyway.
Oh my god, I'm so hungover. I've never been this hungover.
I feel great. I ran 5K this morning.
Really?
No, I threw up in the shower.
Next we'll cover Red Spice, which is unlocked from Psychite refining in the standard research tree. This is made at the drug lab and uses 8 bull's horn per dose. Like Glimmer Quartz, it provides a small amount of food when consumed and is never safe from addiction potential. This however doesn't come with an overdose chance, and the addiction chance is only 0.5%. Red Spice opens up the airways and stings the nostrils, causing 10% pain but increasing breathing by 25%. The biggest upside to Red Spice is it removes existing hangovers. However, it does not stop a fresh hangover from being applied, so to make the best use of this alongside something like a Shatterbrew, you want to wait for the condition to change from gorged to full. Then you can use Red Spice to remove the remaining hangover without it being immediately reapplied. Next we have the first bit of Stoneborn research then, which unlocks the ability to sow those new plants and also gets you access to the Blade Root cigar. These cigars can either be made at a standard crafting spot or a drug lab, and require only 4 blade root each. This blade root comes in with a massive buff to mood, offering 2 separate bonuses, a plus 30 for mellow and a plus 12 for being high on it. As well as these delightful mood bonuses, the affected colonist will also have a melee damage buff, pushing it up to 130%, with a 20% reduction to pain as well. This comes at the cost of 10% consciousness and 10% movement, so whilst they may hit harder, they're going to struggle to chase down any runners and are more likely to miss. Considering this can stack with genes like strong melee and any other damage enhancement, it's a very easy drug to keep handy on your front line, especially as there's also no random overdose chance and a 2-day safe dose interval, with its minimum addiction being 20%, so you'd need to take 7 of these back to back to even begin running that risk. From underground herbs you unlock Dwarven Fermentation. This gets you the Dwarven Cask, which can be used to make 5 different drinks. Starting from the top we have Shroom Ale, which takes 60 stout cap to fill the cask and has an extremely sensitive temperature range, being happiest between 7 and 13 degrees, still fermenting between 2 and 25, with it failing if it falls outside of that range. This Shroom Ale takes 15 days to fully ferment, at which point it becomes 30 bottles that are ready for consumption. It has a very similar addiction and high stats to normal beer, with a very slightly lower tolerance for its addiction. The main difference is that the Shroom Ale buff increases shooting accuracy whilst decreasing manipulation and movement, with its worst point coming at the drunk stage, as it completely removes the manipulation stat, causing a colonist to fumble any held weapon and becoming unable to work. Not sure if this is intended though, as it isn't mentioned on the debuff. As they progress beyond drunk and go into hammered, they do get some of that manipulation back, but then it comes with a hangover and huge penalties to movement as well, so it's best to keep this buff in the low ranges when possible. After that is Sweet Wine, requiring 3 Glimmer Quartz chunks to be crumbled into the barrel to fill it. This has a much higher temperature requirement, sitting happily between 20 and 32 degrees, staying viable between 10 and 44 and failing again if it falls outside that. This process takes a whopping 30 days to complete, so you'll want to make sure these are kept somewhere nice and safe, as it's an expensive loss if you do botch it, losing the 30 bottles that would have been produced. Sweet Wine itself has no random overdose chance and shares its tolerance with other things like Shroom Ale, as they all fall under the broad umbrella of Dwarven Brew Tolerance, so stacking different alcohols will rapidly fulfill the minimum tolerance requirement to form an addiction. The buff from Sweet Wine is all around good times. It boosts movement, social impact, and lowers sleep fall rate, with every bottle consumed also restoring some of the colonist's sleep bar. These effects continue to increase between tipsy, warm, and drunk levels, with them still getting higher at hammered, but that'll have triggered a hangover which lowers consciousness and then hampers most of those gained bonuses. Going above hammered will of course lead to a blackout. Like most other Dwarven drugs, this has an awesome plus 30 mood buff when consumed, making it very easy to manage your colonist's happiness. Next up, you've got the Rage Elixir, which can finally make use of that elixir mush you made way back alongside Shatterbrew. Up to 30 mush can be loaded at a time, which will make 15 bottles of that Rage Elixir. Again, this process has its own happy temperature range, going from 4 to 12 for ideal, 0 to 24 for acceptable, and shitting the bed if you go outside of that. After 15 days, you get your hands on a lovely stack of elixirs, with each gulp of a Rage Elixir causing 20% buildup of its effect. You'll need to manage its consumption carefully to avoid triggering the berserk mental state if this drug's condition gets too high. The Rage Elixir restores hunger on consumption, allowing fighters to use this to provide a strong combat buff as well as keeping themselves fed in a fight. It is, however, never safe to consume. It always risks an overdose and has a constant 1.6% chance of addiction with every dose taken. This effect progresses from annoyed to irate, then dangerous, before finally reaching berserk at anything above 80%, triggering the mental break and having the colonist go totally feral on anyone that gets close enough. In terms of its buffs, this progressively gives more consciousness, movement, natural healing, and melee damage, whilst also lowering the speed of any bleeding and ignoring some pain. It makes for an insanely potent combat drug. Not only that, it has no tolerance mechanic to speak of, so rapid consumption of multiple elixirs will not have a diminishing effect. You always know that you are getting exactly 20% more of a high, so as long as you can keep it under 80%, you're golden, because a colonist fighting with Berserker Rage will tend to get themselves dead. Next in the list is Forge Liquor, but to get that smush you're going to need the next step of research, so we shall cover the drink now and do the smush first thing in the next research step. Taking 25 days to complete, this needs 10 smush to fill the barrel and wants to be held, ideally, between 22 and 40 degrees. It'll survive between 18 and 80 and crap out if it goes above, somehow, or below that. That 10 smush becomes 10 bottles of Forge Liquor. This beverage is surprisingly safe, with an interval of just 1 day per drink, 0 random overdose chance, and a massive 25% minimum tolerance required before addiction is a risk. The buff it offers is an increase in manipulation, maximum comfortable temperature, global work speed, and it also decreases flammability, with it debuffing movement speed at anything above the warm effect level. This buff is fantastic until it hits hammered, and then it gets severely undercut by a double hangover, both standard and pounding, which lowers consciousness to just 58%, completely ruining any positive offset that this drink was providing. Finally, from the cask you have Hive Mead, which needs 60 insect jelly to fill the cask and takes 18 days to complete. Again, it has its own temperature range, so you're going to need multiple different cask rooms with heaters or coolers if you plan on making a variety of these drinks. This one works best between 18 and 24 degrees, with its outer ranges being 10 and 32. So you can pair a few of these casks together, like the Shroom Ale and Rage Elixir in a room around 9 or 10 degrees, and if you're willing to chance it, Sweet Wine, Forge Liquor and Hive Mead at around 23 degrees. Hive Mead is produced in batches of 30 from a full barrel. This mead comes in with no random overdose chance, a safe dose interval of less than a day, and a massive 30% minimum tolerance for addiction. With the downside to it being, you're only really getting a mood buff from this, with it also claiming to lower the chances of the drinker becoming violent. The Hive Mead progressively increases the rate that sleep rate falls, making a colonist drowsy if they're consuming this regularly, so make sure this isn't being consumed in the morning as a pick-me-up with scheduled recreation time. You don't want this debuff floating around on someone all day. That leads us into complex concoctions then. Let's cover that Forge Liquor smush first, given that we've already gone over the drink. This is made at a smelter, combining 15 bull's horns, 15 stout cap, and a stone chunk, which goes a long way in explaining the effects of the drink itself. A lovely forged rocky beverage, still better than Foster's. As well as that liquor smush, we get the cheaper version of Elixir Mush too, costing only 15 bull's horn and 10 blade root, making it 5 bull's horn cheaper than the standard recipe. The final two things you can make are Beard Wax and Miner's Delight, both produced at the drug lab. Beard Wax is very straightforward, costing 4 steel and 2 Nutrimine per jar. This imparts a bonus of +1 beauty, +10 negotiation impact, +25 social impact, and +5% trade price improvement for the user for 6 hours. It's always safe to use and doesn't even require a beard to apply it. Miner's Delight is an expensive beast indeed, needing 4 psychoid leaves, 20 gold and 2 jade per dose. This concoction of drug and mineral powder isn't exactly safe, with it having a 2% random overdose chance and always risking addiction when used, at 5% per dose. So what are you getting for this risk? 15% increased mining yield, 10% more movement, and pain reduced down to just 20% experienced. This can easily end up paying for itself if you use it to excavate more deposits of gold or jade, especially valuable for things like plasteel too. Just make sure you've got a good doctor on standby if this happens to go a little bit wrong. And finally, something you can't craft yourself, Alkahest. This works somewhat like Luciferium, minus the whole devil's bargain your brain's gonna melt out of your ears vibe. You'll only find it on exotic traders or as complex loot, with a single dose always causing an immediate addiction. Once Alkahest has been taken, that's kind of it. You're always going to have that need, and whilst it won't kill a colonist to go without a dose for an extended period of time, it will certainly hamper their mood and cause a significant debuff. For the positives at least, Alkahest buffs consciousness by 15%, lowers sleep fall rate by 45%, adds 70% social impact and 20% negotiation ability. However, it also comes with a debuff of green veins, and the more shots you take, the more obvious your use of this substance becomes, with each tier of green veins applying 20% more social impact penalty, from discreet to visible and finally prominent, offsetting that 70% gain from Alkahest quite significantly. The thirst debuff will only become an issue when the need itself isn't met. but if it is left unquenched, the colonist suffers a max of 80% consciousness, a max of 70% talking, a 40% penalty to movement, and halved manipulation. Ouch. So whilst this is a good drug for socialites, which are exceptionally hard to come by for the Stoneborn, you're going to want a reliable stockpile of this when you first take the plunge, as you might be looking at some pretty hefty trouble down the road if you don't come across any more of it. And all of that is Stoneborn. So much more than just a race. But of course, if you feel the drugs are all a little bit too involved or impactful, you can easily just take the Xenotype and style instead. It's nice to have something split out like this so you don't need to throw a bunch of stuff into Cherry Picker. Easily a mod that I'd recommend. The art style, thematic nature, the balance, it's all solid. They make for a fantastic race to use in a xenophobic challenge run of sorts. Hide out in your mountain base, only trust other Stoneborn, live off all kinds of mushrooms and alcoholic beverages. Just get ready to deal with the inevitable bug infestations, and try not to use incendiary weapons to kill them. The fermentation process in your brewery will not appreciate it. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.